Hey, this is Nicholas. In this video, we're going to talk about herbs, specifically single herbs. We're going to talk about some study strategies and some study tools for reviewing single herbs. And then we're going to go through some of the secondary functions of the herbs. And what I mean by that is each herb has a function that's associated with its category, like herbs that warm the interior. But then a lot of these herbs also have a secondary function that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with its category. And so sometimes we can group those herbs together, like herbs that clear summer heat, herbs that brighten the eyes, herbs that promote lactation, herbs that relieve headache. There are a lot of herbs that have these common secondary functions, but they're spread out through a whole bunch of different categories. So sometimes it's helpful to talk about all those herbs together. So usually with the live streams, I just do a free-for-all Q&A. I just answer people's questions. But it sounds like right now there's a lot of people who are studying for finals. There are people who are studying for year-end exams, and there are people who are studying for boards. And herbs is something that a lot of people have trouble with. So I figured we'd do some quick review. We can do some study strategies, and then also some actual review of the herbs. So that's what we're doing today. So if you're here live, let me know in the chat, or if you're watching on the replay, let me know in the comments. Are you studying herbs? What level are you studying? Are you taking finals coming up? Does your school have year-end exams, first year ends or second year ends, where you have to do all of the material at once? Or are you studying for boards? So let me know how that's going. My internet connection was a little bit wonky this morning, so hopefully everything's going through okay. Also, I feel like I got up early and my coffee's starting to wear off. So if I'm not too peppy, then that's the reason why. But it looks like a few people here from the Philippines or from Moscow. So Joyce is here. Oh, from Chengdu. I had a teacher from Chengdu, Sichuan province. That's where pandas come from. That's good. I need to go get some hueguo roe. So a lot of people from the Philippines. It's probably like 2 in the morning in the Philippines, so thank you for coming. So let's talk about herbs. Let's talk about single herbs. Let's talk about how to study for single herbs. And we're going to talk about using this book specifically. Because I feel like a lot of people buy this book in the beginning and they never open it. And then when they graduate, they end up selling it on Facebook. And it makes me really sad when I see all these posts on Facebook where they're like, I'm selling my textbooks, brand new or like new, never been used, never opened. And that just makes me kind of sad that you've never opened your textbook. So we'll talk about how to use this specifically for review, because if you're reviewing for a final, if you're reviewing for a large test, you probably don't want to read this whole book. It's like 1,100 pages and the font is really small, and so you probably don't want to be doing that. But there are some things we can use to make studying easier. Because if you're studying for a final, if you're studying for a big test, you might have to shift your study strategy. If you're doing weekly quizzes where you're only learning like 8 herbs at a time or 10 herbs at a time, then you can go really dive in and go in depth and make sure that you're learning all the details of all the herbs, and that can be a good process to really get familiar with the herbs. But when you get to the end of the semester and you're taking the final, or when you get to the end of the year and you're taking year-end exams, you probably don't want to be that detailed. You want to more zoom out and get more of a big picture view. That you don't want the individual details of every herb. You want kind of the major bullet points. Just because there's so much information, you want to know what are the important things that I need to know. And so it turns out there's actually some good resources in this book and in other textbooks, but just not everybody has opened their books and looked around very much, so you might not know that they're there. So let's go over some of those. Let's see if I can switch over. We got people from San Jose. That's not too far from me. And yeah, are saying, yes, it's 2 a.m. You must have set your alarm to get up early in the Philippines. So thanks for being here. I'm not sure if you all study herbs in the Philippines. I think Hector was telling me that some people study just acupuncture, and then there's another level or another certification level that involves herbs. So I'm not sure if you all study herbs in the Philippines, but hopefully this will still be fun. So we have this book, and so if you're studying for a large test or you're trying to review, maybe a good place to start is make sure you go to the beginning of the chapter. And here we'll get a nice description of what's going on generally in the chapter. See if I can zoom in here. So at the beginning of every chapter, Bensky has a nice sort of introduction to what's going on with all the herbs in this chapter. And so this can be really good because what he's telling you in that introduction is sort of the common characteristics of all these herbs. So if we have like aromatic herbs that transform dampness, that one little paragraph will tell us what are the common signs and symptoms of dampness, what kind of organs or channels we expect these herbs to enter, what are their major functions. It'll tell us taste, temperature, entering channel, and even cautions and contraindications. So even by just reading this short little paragraph, we get a lot of review information about all of the herbs in this category. So this can be a really good starting point. Now, as we go further in and look at this, there's like a lot of words. It's like maybe you don't want to read all of this information because just for one herb, there's a lot of stuff to read, a lot of commentary. And, oh, I have sirens going by. Sorry about the noise. And this is something that, for me, I really like reading this. It's really interesting for me who's been doing herbs for a while, and it's really good to see some of the comparison about herbs, the way herbs are used in formulas and things like that. But I can see where if this is your first year and this is your first introduction to herbs, a lot of this information can be really overwhelming. So especially if you're reviewing for a final, you probably just don't have time to look through all of this information. So you might not be too interested in all this text that's going on here. But something you can do is make sure that you look at the end of the chapter. Because with Bensky, at the end of every chapter, he has a section called Summary of Comparative Functions. And this is really good information because he's going through and giving you, it's really just a couple paragraphs or maybe a page with the larger categories where he's giving you the main functions of each herb. And he's also telling you what differentiates these herbs. And so what are the key things to look for that makes these herbs different. So we have a lot of people, or I've heard a lot of students say, they look at a category of herbs and they all look the same. It's like all of these herbs transform dampness. All of these herbs release the exterior. It just all runs together. How do I tell them apart? Well, when you get to this summary of comparative functions, he'll go through and really highlight the differences between these herbs. So he'll talk about which herbs maybe we're transforming dampness with all of these herbs, but some herbs are better for moving qi, whereas some herbs are better for drying dampness. So both sha ren and cao guo are aromatic transformed dampness, but sha ren has a good action of regulating qi and treating middle jiao qi stagnation, whereas cao guo is very good at drying things out. So he can tell you the differences there. If you're looking at B syndrome, he can tell you which herbs are better for the upper body, which herbs are better for the lower body, which herbs are better for cold B, which herbs are better for hot B, things like that. If you're looking at herbs that release the exterior, then he'll go through and in very short paragraphs tell you these herbs are better for treating symptoms of the eyes, whereas these herbs are better for rashes, whereas this herb is warmer than this herb is more acrid. And so he can really tell you in just a couple pages the key highlights of each herb and how we differentiate all of those herbs. So that can be a good thing to look at, especially if you're reviewing. You don't necessarily have to go through and look at the main entry for each herb. You can just go to the end of the chapter and get kind of that summary. And that'll just be a nice quick summary, and that'll be easy to go through. It's easy to highlight and take notes from that. Now, I will admit, here we're looking at Bensky. I actually think that the book by Chen and Chen does a better job at this. It's Chinese Herbal Medicine and Pharmacology by John Chen and Tina Chen. That's another book that a lot of people are using. It has a lot of good information about drug-herb interactions, and it has a lot of the studies associated with herbs. But if you look in that book, he also has a really good section at the end of the chapter where he summarizes the herbs. He summarizes the category. He tells you what's the taste and temperature of these herbs, what are the common entering channels of these herbs. Then he kind of has some tables and he has some explanations. So in terms of that, I actually almost like the Chen and Chen book better than Bensky's summary of comparative functions, but most people only have one materia medica, and they usually get Bensky because that's kind of the standard now. But that's something maybe if you go to the library and want to check out that book, look at the Chen and Chen, Chinese Herbal Medicine and Pharmacology, I think is the complete title. And with each section, with each category, go to the end of the chapter, and he has a really nice summary with tables. Maybe you can just photocopy that, and maybe don't buy the whole book if you don't want to, if you don't need that many books, but you can sort of photocopy the end of the book, and that can give you some really nice study material. The other thing that we can look at for review is not the end of each chapter, but if we go to the very end of the book in one of the appendices, this is page 1079 is where it starts. I don't know if you can see that very well on this camera. Oh, I'm zoomed all the way in. I can't zoom in anymore. But basically, he goes herb by herb. He starts with chapter 1, warm acrid herbs that release the exterior, and he just gives you a table of the herb. He goes Latin first, Chinese name, and then gives you the major function. So mahuang, ephedra herba, promotes sweating to release the exterior or disperses cold, disseminates lung qi to calm wheezing, and facilitates urination. So on one side, he has the functions, and on the other side, he has either like the indications or the patterns that go along with it. And so this is just a short major functions of all of the herbs. And this actually goes on for a long time for all of the herbs. And so this can be a good way to get kind of a quick overview of the functions of the herbs, the functions and indications of the herbs. Rather than going through and reading the main section and trying to pick out those key functions, here he has it just set up in tables. So if you're making note cards, this can be a good place to go to. If you're making flashcards to quiz yourself, this can be a good place to go to. If you just want to study the key points of each herb, this can be a good place to go to. And again, that's at the very back of the book, starting on page 1079. And so this is actually something I've just discovered recently. Like, I think I've owned this book for 10, 15 years now, and I only recently discovered that this was here. Like, nobody told me about it, nobody mentioned it. And I was just kind of flipping through and I saw it, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool, that this is a really good way to summarize the key functions of the herbs. If you don't like reading 5 pages about Renshen, you can go to the back and just look it up in these tables, and you'll get the key functions really short, really concise, and some of the key indications for each herb. So that's something I would encourage you to do, that you can actually open this book. It's actually useful. I actually have been using it to prop up my laptop, but you can actually open it and read it, and there's some really good information. Even if you're studying for finals, if you just want to review, if you're studying for a final exam, if you're studying for a year-end exam, or if you're studying for boards, this has some kind of nice, concise summary of all the herbs. If you're studying formulas, he kind of has the same thing in the formula book. So the blue book is called Formulas and Strategies. And so if you're in a formula class, at our school it was herbs 4, 5, 6. If you're taking a second year end where you need to know the formulas, instead of looking through the main chapter where he discusses all the herbs in detail and really analyzes the formula, again, that can be a good thing to do during the semester when you're first learning the formulas, making sure that you really know all of the formulas, go into the analysis of the formula, make sure you know the ingredients, make sure you know how each ingredient is contributing to the goal of the formula. That's really good when you're learning the formulas during the semester. At the end of the semester, when you need to review, what you can do is flip to the end of the chapter, and he has very good tables with every formula that's in that chapter, and you can just get a quick overview of what pattern each formula is treating and some of the key signs and symptoms, tongue and pulse, to look for with each formula. So don't necessarily go through and look at each entry. You can go to the table at the end of the chapter. And again, that's something that not a lot of people always know about. So that's one tool you can use when you're studying herbs, when you're studying a large number of herbs. That's one place you can go to. And I feel like that's something that not everybody knows about. Oh, we got people from all over. Nada from Algeria, hi. Good morning from Kuwait. Good morning from California. So that's great. Yeah, the book is by Bensky. This is kind of our standard, at least in America, this has been kind of our standard book. Chinese Herbal Medicine, Materia Medica. The latest one is a 3rd edition, and Dan Bensky is the author, but there's a couple other ones, but most people just call this the Bensky. I have the hardcover one. I'm not sure that they print it hardcover anymore. I think they switched to like a flexi-bound version that's a little bit cheaper, but I feel like the paper is really thin. I just don't like that version, so I feel like if you go on Amazon and you can find a hardcover version, or you can find a used one if someone's selling it online, I think it's worth it to get the hardcover version. But you can also look at the Chen and Chen book by John and Tina Chen. Maybe I'll put a link to that below after this is done, if you want to look for that. I think that book is a little bit cheaper. That book has nicer pictures. Like Bensky just has illustrations of the plant, whereas the Chen book has photographs of the actual cut raw herbs, so it's a little bit easier for herb identification. He goes into a little bit more detail about possible drug-herb interactions or certain pharmacological effects of the herbs, and he also has a really nice summary at the end of each chapter of the category as a whole and the functions. And so that's I actually really like that Chen and Chen book. At first I only used Bensky. Now I use that Chen and Chen book, and I use Eric Brand and Nigel Weissman's book. The Nigel Weissman and Eric Brand book isn't quite as good at giving summaries, but the actual entries are more concise. And so if you like Nigel Weissman terminology. Hello, Jen from Ohio. I don't think I've been to Ohio in a while. I used to live in Michigan. We would go to the Toledo Zoo. Then for a while I lived in Kentucky, and apparently it was like really popular, and like people would like go to Cincinnati. That was a like really popular location. Oh, David, that's an interesting question. Maybe I'll do that next week. I want to focus on herbs this time, so save that question. I'm going to get to it next week. The meridian clock is really interesting, so we'll do that next time. So we are talking about herbs, reviewing single herbs, and some strategies for studying herbs when you're doing like a final or a year-end exam or a board exam, something where you need to make sense of a lot of information with a lot of herbs. So first thing we talked about was using your textbook, actually opening your textbook and not necessarily reading each entry, but looking at the introduction to each chapter will give you some good information about the category as a whole, the herbs, common taste, temperature, entering channels, cautions and contraindications, key signs and symptoms you're going to look for. That's going to be in a couple paragraphs at the beginning of each chapter. Look at the end of each chapter for a summary of comparative functions, and that's going to give you what sticks out with each herb. And then if you look at the very end of the book, he has nice tables that summarize the functions of each herb. And so if you're making flashcards or things like that, that can be a good place to go to. The other thing I would really focus on, this is especially if you're doing a year-end exam. So again, let me know if your school does first year ends or second year ends or things like that. I think some schools do comprehensive exams, some schools don't. But then when you get to the end, you usually have to take a board exam knowing all the herbs. So another thing people ask me a lot is, when I have these year-end exams, what things should I focus on? Because by the time you get to your first year ends, you've learned between 285 and 290 herbs. That's a lot of information, but then you're also studying acupuncture and biomed and foundations. You have a lot of information. You can't just go back and relearn everything. What advice would I give for taking that test? And I would say, by far, the number one thing I would focus on with herbs is make sure that you know the category. That is, each herb belongs to a category. You need to make sure that you can look at an herb, look at the name of the herb, and then just automatically know its category, know which category it belongs to. And this is really important when you're taking a large comprehensive test, because a lot of times just knowing that category will give you a lot of information about that herb. That knowing the category gives you the major function of that herb. Herbs that release the exterior, release the exterior. If an herb belongs to the category herbs that tonify qi, its major function is to tonify qi. Also from that category, we can start inferring things about certain properties of the herbs. So if you get a question about taste, temperature, or entering channel, a lot of times you can answer those questions based on the category. So if a herb belongs to the category warm, acrid herbs that release the exterior, it's probably warm and acrid. It probably enters the lung channel because the lung channel governs the exterior and the opening and closing of the pores. Things like that. If an herb belongs to the category herbs that invigorate blood, it probably enters the liver channel because the liver stores blood, and whenever an herb has anything to do with blood, it enters the liver channel. It can tell you about cautions and contraindications. So if an herb belongs to the category herbs that invigorate blood, a lot of those herbs are contraindicated during pregnancy or with heavy menses, because if a person is pregnant, we want to stabilize that pregnancy. We don't want to have a lot of movement, or especially not a lot of downward movement. So knowing the category can really help in terms of taste, temperature, entering channel, cautions and contraindications. And when you get to these, maybe not so much at semester finals, but when you get to like year-end exams, a lot of times you can answer a question just by knowing the category. Sometimes if you can't answer the question completely, that you can at least let you cross out some of the obviously wrong choices. So you might not be able to circle the correct answer, but you can at least cross out one or two answers to narrow it down. And so sometimes when I would get a question, it would ask a question and would give me 4 or 5 herbs as the multiple choice. I would first go in and write down the category of each herb next to that herb to see if it could help me narrow down the question. So that's something I would really focus on, that if you want to focus on one thing, make sure that you know the category of each herb. So a couple years ago, I made a thing on my website. Let's see if this actually works. I have like 6 different things plugged into my laptop, so I'm not sure if my little computer can keep up with this. If I'm lagging a lot or echoey, I'm sorry about that. But so I made a thing on my website. There's a link to it in the description below, and this is just a category test. And so what you do is it's giving you an herb, and it's asking you what category does it belong to. So Juhua is a cool acrid herb that releases the exterior. It turned green, it means I got it right. And then down here, it's going to pop up with some information about the category in general. So cool acrid herbs that release the exterior are for wind heat conditions. They tend to be cool and acrid. They tend to enter the lung channel. And then this will give you, if you just want to review something about the individual herb, it'll give you kind of a one-liner about the herb. So Juhua is chrysanthemum. It's releasing the exterior. It's especially good for eye problems. I'm looking at the wrong camera. And so this will just go on forever. Jine is good for food stagnation. I'll tell you some things about Jine as chicken gizzard. And so this is something that you can go and it's completely random, so it'll give you a bunch of stuff. It'll just give you a random herb and give you some random choices. So this is something that you can just play around with and make sure that you stabilize and bind. Rodoko, I tend to get confused because Rodoko also warms the interior. So I want to say warm the interior, but it's technically stabilize and bind. Rodoko is nutmeg. So this is something that you could go through and, let me get back to my right screen here. I have to click finish. No? Oh, let me get back to my screen. There we go. And maybe that doesn't work anymore. So that's something that you can go and play around with and finish. No, not end broadcast. I don't want to do picture-in-picture anymore. Apparently I don't know how to use my software. So that's something that you can go through and, oh, now you're working. Sorry, my little computer is having trouble keeping up. Are we good? I think we're good. I think we stopped flashing around. Sorry if everything just exploded. I hope I'm still on YouTube. It looks like I'm still on YouTube. I hope everyone's still there. I don't think any of my comments are coming through, but I hope everything's still there. So that's something you can do. So again, basic strategy, make sure that you know the category of each herb, and that's just a way that you can make sure that you know the categories. And again, that can really help you answer questions. You still there? I hope that's a statement and not a question. I hope that you're not asking am I still here? Here, David had a good question. Do you think learning the Latin botanical names is important? This is something that when I was teaching, I remember being in a meeting and we were discussing this, like, do we really need to make people learn the Latin? So it kind of depends on your school. If your school makes you learn the Latin, sometimes you just have to know the Latin. Most of the tests I've seen will always give you both the pinyin and the Latin. I think when you're on board, they will actually give you the Chinese characters and the pinyin and the Latin. So in that sense, you don't really need to know the Latin. When I was studying, we always had to know the Latin, so I just would always know them. I just think of them together: Mahong, Ephedra Urbra, Guager, Cinnamomum ramulus, Zitsuye, Perillifolium. So I just always knew them. Sometimes it's useful just because when you go to get herbs in a physical herb store, sometimes they don't have the pinyin. Sometimes on the package of herbs, they'll have the Chinese characters, and then they'll have a Latin pharmaceutical or botanical name, but they don't have any pinyin. And so sometimes that's good that they either make sure you can either recognize the herb or that you can recognize the Latin name, just if you're shopping in an herb shop, in a Chinese herb shop. But that's usually been like in a Chinatown and an herb shop like that. Certain manufacturers just don't print the pinyin on the package. If you're just ordering herbs from online, they usually have both the pinyin and the Latin, so you don't really need to know both. Sometimes I've seen pills like patent medicines or pre-made pills that on the label, it's again, they'll have the Chinese characters and they'll have the Latin name, but they won't have any pinyin on it. So somebody will hand me a bottle and say, what's this good for? What does this do? Or do I need to worry about anything in this? I go through and look at the ingredients and it only has the Latin ingredients. So I have to know the Latin in order to figure out what's going on with this formula. And sometimes that's really annoying because I feel like the Latin isn't always standardized. Sometimes there are really weird things like Fong Fong. Nowadays we call it Sapochnikovia radix. They used to call it Lediborrelia root. So sometimes they'll say either one. I feel like there was something weird like Fu Ling used to be called like Indian bread or something like that. So sometimes there are like really weird names for things, and knowing the Latin. Yeah, so that's kind of what I think we had the same thing where there's no pinyin, there's only Latin and Chinese. But I feel that's getting fairly uncommon now. I think nowadays you could probably get away without knowing the Latin. Especially if you're like ordering online from what May Way or New Herbs or Spring Winds, you can just look up the pinyin. And I think it's kind of funny that I have some people telling me that they have a really easy time with the pinyin, but they can never remember the Latin. And I have other people that tell me that they're really comfortable with the Latin and they remember the Latin, but they can't remember the Chinese. And so that was always another kind of funny thing, where for me, I had a really easy time remembering the Chinese, but it was much harder to remember the pinyin. Yeah, and I think this is a good way to do it. That sometimes that's what I'll tell people, is that when you're studying the herbs, just get into the habit of always saying both of them at the same time. So you can say, Ma Huang ephedra herba has 3 functions. Ma Huang ephedra herba promotes sweating to release the exterior for Taiyang excess. Ma Huang ephedra herba disseminates lung qi to stop cough. And Ma Huang ephedra herba promotes urination to treat edema. It also treats B syndrome. So if you just always refer to the herb by both, then after a while it just gets stuck in your head that those two names go together. But that would be kind of like when you're going through and studying. Sometimes it's hard to do that after the fact, after you've already learned the herbs. So those are some basic study tips for taking large tests, taking finals. That one, use your book and just look at the summaries. Your textbooks usually have summaries. You don't have to like read the entire chapter when you're just reviewing at the end. You can read the introduction at the beginning of the chapter, read the summary at the end of the chapter, and assuming that you actually studied everything in the middle when you were actually going to school, hopefully that will be a good review just to remind you and kind of stick out some of the key points. And then you can also go to the very end of the book, at least in Bensky. If you go to the very end of the book, he has basically flashcards already made for you with the major functions of the herbs. And then also number 2, if you're studying, maybe not so much if you're studying for like an herbs 2 final, but definitely if you're studying for year ends or something like that, or when you're preparing for your formula classes, make sure that you know the categories of the herbs. That will also help you when you're studying formulas, that when you're trying to analyze a formula, knowing the category of each herb will help you understand what that formula does. So number 1 thing, make sure you know your categories. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about the secondary functions of herbs. Drink some tea. Hopefully that I won't have to get up and take a break because I've been drinking so much tea. All right, so let's talk about the secondary functions of herbs. And what do I mean when I say the secondary functions? Well, we talked about the importance of knowing the category. So usually when we learn herbs, we divide them into categories, and those categories are based on the major function. So we have herbs that release the exterior, herbs that clear heat, herbs that drain dampness, purgatives that purge the large intestine. And so we're kind of grouping them together by their main function. But a lot of these herbs also have secondary functions that maybe don't have anything to do with their category. And so these would be things like we have certain herbs that are good for clearing summer heat. Now we don't have a category, herbs that clear summer heat, but we do have quite a few herbs that are good for clearing summer heat. And it turns out they're like scattered across a whole bunch of different categories. Or we have herbs that kill parasites. So it turns out we actually have a category, its own category, herbs that kill parasites. And this is like Da Suan and Shijunza. We have a category, herbs that kill parasites, but even outside of that category, we have a lot of herbs that have the function killing parasites that are just spread across a bunch of different other categories. And so we have a lot of just common functions like that, and sometimes it can be helpful to group them all together. So instead of grouping things by its major category, we can kind of group them together based on their secondary function. And that's what we're going to talk about. So like we said, one example would be summer heat. Let's see if my thing still works. There we go, summer heat. So like we said, we have a category herbs that clear heat, but that has, herbs. We have cool lacquer to release the exterior. We have herbs that drain fire, herbs that clear heat and dry dampness. We don't actually have a category herbs that clear summer heat. So if we have this condition of summer heat, we're going to have to look across the other categories. They're kind of spread out in a bunch of different categories. So we want to know what are the herbs that treat summer heat. So maybe the first thing we should ask is, what is summer heat? This is kind of always kind of funny that when I was in class and I'd ask students, what is summer heat? The response they would usually give is like, well, it's heat that happens during the summer. And it actually turns out that that is a very good description of summer heat. It's heat that happens during the summer. It's similar to our idea of like heat stroke or sunstroke. That's summer heat. But there are a few things we could say about summer heat. Number one, summer heat is always external. So when we talk about the 6 evils, summer heat is one of the 6 evils. Remember the 6 evils or the 6 environmental qi or the 6 pathogenic qi? We have heat, cold, dampness, dryness, wind, and summer heat. So summer heat is one of those 6 evils. What makes summer heat stand out is summer heat is only external. So a lot of the other evils can be either externally contracted and invade from the outside, or they can be internally generated. So like with wind, we can have an external invasion of wind attacking us from the outside and penetrating through the channels, or we can have internally generated wind, usually due to like either excess of liver yang stirring up wind or liver blood deficiency. So we can have external wind or we can have internal wind. With dampness, we can have an external invasion of dampness. Dampness gets in the channels because of the humid environment, the damp environment. It gets in the channels and makes you feel heavy, gives you joint pain. Or we can have internally generated dampness, which is like you ate too much ice cream and your spleen don't work. So we can have external or internal. Well, with summer heat, we can only have an external attack of summer heat or external summer heat. There's no such thing as internally generated summer heat. So that's number one, is summer heat is only an external evil. Number two, like the name suggests, summer heat is seasonal. It pretty much only happens during the summer because it's heat that occurs during the summer. So with other things like wind, we might say wind is more predominant in spring, but you can have wind anytime. You can have an external attack of wind cold in the fall, in the summer. You can have wind anytime. Summer heat, it's more in the summer. So maybe that's a way we can differentiate it between other types of heat. Like Yangming heat might look very similar, or damp heat might look very similar. We can differentiate summer heat because it pretty much only happens during the summer. The other thing we can say about summer heat is there's often an element of dampness involved. And so this kind of depends on the environment. Do you live in a really hot, dry environment, and that's more like of a heat thing? Or do you live in a really damp, humid environment? Like I think somebody said they were from Chengdu. I think Chengdu in Sichuan province is very famously hot and humid, and that's why you have to eat a lot of spicy food so that the humidity doesn't penetrate into your body. So summer heat can often come along with dampness. So in those situations, we might see other signs we typically associate with dampness, like heavy body, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, or urination problems. So that's what we're talking about when we say summer heat. So summer heat, like we said, summer heat is an external pathogen. Unlike the other 6, summer heat is only external. There's no such thing as internal summer heat. Summer heat is seasonal. It happens during the summer. And then we have 2 types. Nigel Weissman is kind of funny. He calls them summer heat and summer heat damp, or summer heat dampness. I think, oh, that's good. Chengdu is hazy all year round. I want to go visit Chengdu. I have a teacher from Chengdu, and I always want to go visit Chengdu with him. I'm not sure I could handle the spiciness. Go get some lots of jiding. Anyway, so Nigel Weissman calls this summer heat, which is like a more heat predominant one, and then we have summer heat dampness, where it's combined with damp. So when we look at summer heat, a lot of these symptoms look like the 4 bigs. Remember when we talked about Yangming channel heat, we talked about the 4 big, or the 4 great symptoms big fever, big sweat, big thirst and vexation, and a big pulse or a rapid surging pulse. So here with summer heat, we have same thing, high fever, thirst, vexation, dryness, and a surging pulse. But here notice we have absence of sweating. And so this is just, it's summer, you've been out in the sun for a long time, and the heat is drying up the fluid. So instead of like in a pathogen where you have profuse sweating, here we have no sweating. But again, this would be like sunstroke or heat stroke, like you just were out in the heat for too long. Then with our summer heat dampness, notice that we still have that heat like fever and things like that, but we have a lot of these other signs of dampness going along. So we have heavy limbs, which is a characteristic of dampness, loss of appetite. When there's dampness obstructing the middle, you have poor appetite, chest depression, nausea and vomiting, abnormal stool, usually like loose stool or diarrhea because there's dampness, and then pay attention to red urine. So a lot of times with summer heat dampness, that's kind of like we get symptoms like Lynn syndrome, like when we have UTI urination problems. When there's a damp heat pathogen blocking the smooth flow of urine, we can get difficult urination, scanty urination, burning urination, or urine that's red or turbid in color. And so that's another thing we're going to see when summer heat combined with dampness. So a lot of these things just look like damp heat. So again, we have a whole bunch of herbs with this function, clear summer heat. We don't have it doesn't have its own category, so they're scattered across different categories. So like we have Xiangru in the warm, acrid, release the exterior category. And so this might be kind of funny that we just said we're treating summer heat and Xiangru is in the warm, acrid, release heat. Like, why are we using a warm herb to treat summer heat? And so Shangri is kind of the funny one, that technically what it's for is when we have an external attack of wind cold during the warm summer months. So basically what this would look like is it's really hot during the summer, and so you try to escape the heat by doing a lot of cold things. So you might seek out a lot of shade or go into a cave that's really dark and drink a lot of cold water or eat a lot of cold foods because you're trying to escape the heat. In modern times, it would be like you're blasting the AC, and because you're exposing yourself to so much cold, you can actually get a wind cold attack during the warm summer months, and that's what Xiangru is for, and that's why it's in the warm, acrid, release the exterior category. But it turns out we also use it for just regular summer heat. So that's Xiangru. Oh, and something we should probably point out, because when we talk about summer heat damp, because we're dealing with dampness, a lot of those herbs that help with the dampness are also aromatic to help with the dampness. And so I think Xiangru is one of those that's aromatic in property. And then with Xiangru, you also just have to be careful that we have one herb called Xiangru and one herb called Shang. And so if you're just learning the pinyin, that can be really confusing. A lot of people get confused on that. So Xiangru is the one for summer heat, and that's pretty much all that we use it for. It only shows up in a couple formulas, but those formulas are usually for summer heat. Xiang is the frankincense and myrrh, the blood invigorating, regenerate flesh herb. So make sure you don't get those confused. Other herbs that clear summer heat, Xigua. So this one is from the category herbs that drain fire. So again, these are scattered across a bunch of different categories. Xigua is watermelon, and so hopefully this one is pretty obvious that you eat watermelon during the summer. If you eat watermelon during the winter, people are going to look at you funny. So watermelon is really good for clearing heat. It's also very juicy. It has a lot of fluid, so it generates body fluid. So when we had that summer heat, and we had a lot of thirst and dryness, Xigua clears that heat, and it also generates body fluids. And so that's something you would just use in food therapy. Other food therapy herbs, He and Yu Do from the heat toxicity category. He is lotus leaf, Yu Do is mung bean. So again, these are like food therapy things. He Ye lotus leaf, I don't think you actually eat it. Like it's really hard, tough. You can't actually eat it, so you'd like boil it and use the water. Or I think more common is they'll soak lotus leaf and then wrap things in it. So you can have like a little rice ball that you wrap in lotus leaf, or you can even have meat that you wrap in lotus leaf, and then you steam it, and then that lotus leaf flavor gets into the food. I think it gives it kind of a green tea taste. So when you say Ye is used for food therapy, I think that's more what we're talking about. Yudo is mung bean, so we could use it in like a kanji. So those clear summer heat. They're in the heat toxicity category, but one of their major functions is clearing summer heat. If we wanted to really differentiate them, I think we say that Ye is better for diarrhea. That was one of our symptoms of summer heat. Yudo is better for thirst. I think I've heard some people say they use Yudo for like Xiangru and diabetes because thirst is a common symptom there. So Ye and Yudo also clear summer heat. Qinghao is in the deficiency heat category. This is the one that treats malaria. So Qinghao is in that category for clearing deficiency heat, but it turns out it clears a lot of internal heat. So deficiency heat, liver heat, and then also it can be good for summer heat. Qinghao is another one of those aromatic herbs. Huashi is from the drain dampness category. So huashi is one of our herbs that we use for Lin syndrome. So especially if we have summer heat with those urination problems like dark red urine or difficult urination, huashi is very slippery. I mean, huashi means slippery stone. So it kind of helps release the heat through the urine and disinhibit urination that can come along with summer heat. Maybe you can think huashi because this is talcum, so this is like baby powder. So this can also be applied externally. Like if you're really hot and sweaty during the summer, you can use baby powder or talcum applied externally to help with that heat. And so we can use this for even damp heat conditions or burns. So huashi, another important summer heat one. Hoshang is in the aromatic transformed dampness category. This is the herb that hippies smell like. Patchouli. Hoshang is patchouli. So again, here we're in the aromatic transformed dampness. So this is good when, especially when we have those symptoms of dampness that can come along with summer heat. Remember, Hoshang is the one that it transforms dampness to treat stomach problems, but it also releases the exterior. So we use it a lot for stomach flu when you have an external attack, but also nausea and vomiting, like Hoshang Zhengqi-san. Anyway, Hoshang releases the exterior, and that includes releasing summer heat through the exterior, and then its aromatic property can help with the dampness. Baidu is in the tonified qi category. This is hyacinth bean. So this one's tonifies qi. It's very good for treating diarrhea. It's also good for summer heat, because remember with summer heat damp, one of our symptoms was diarrhea. So all of those, so that's also good for summer heat. So those are our summer heat herbs. And notice that conveniently, a lot of these are foods. So Xigua is watermelon, Yudo and Baibiendo are beans, something that's easy to cook. Ye, I don't think we use as cooking quite as much in America. But so a lot of these are actually foods, and so that can be very easy to recommend to patients that if it's really hot during the summer, even if they don't have like such severe symptoms as heat stroke, but if you're in a heat wave or there's hot summer months, maybe you could recommend these things as foods to include so that they can kind of beat the heat with watermelon and mung bean. So that's one example of secondary functions, that we don't have a category herbs that clear summer heat, but we do have a lot of herbs with this common function, clear summer heat, and they're just spread across a whole bunch of different categories. Ooh, Arata's taking first year ends. Good luck. Yeah, first year ends can be hard because, I don't know, I think year ends are kind of interesting. A lot of people don't like taking them. I actually, I think they're good just because sometimes you go through your first year and you're freaking out. You're like, I don't know anything. But then you get to this first year end test and you realize like, oh, I actually know quite a bit of stuff. They're actually asking me a lot of questions. I actually know quite a bit of stuff. Oh yeah, herb ID. That's another thing. I'm not sure. I'm never sure if schools are doing that anymore. We used to have the herb ID test where you had to ID the herbs. So that's another thing you might want to, you have to do sometimes. So that was summer heat. What else can we look at? What are some other common secondary functions we can look at? Herbs that calm restless fetus. So this is kind of an interesting one. We have a lot of herbs with this action, calm restless fetus. And so here we're talking, when we say calm restless fetus, we're talking about threatened miscarriage. So when we say restless fetus, that can mean excessive movement of the fetus, like there's a lot of kicking, like more than normal. This can also mean like a bearing down sensation or a sagging sensation, kind of like what we see with buzhang that the sinking sensation. Or in severe cases, this can mean bleeding during pregnancy, vaginal bleeding during pregnancy. And so with those things, what our worry about is that could potentially, those signs could mean that there's potential for a miscarriage. So we want to calm the fetus to secure the pregnancy to prevent miscarriage. So that's what we mean when we say calm restless fetus. Taidong, we can call it stirring fetus or restless fetus. I think Nigel Weissman says stirring fetus, like just the fetus is moving around too much. So that could be excessive movement and excessive kicking. I've never been pregnant, but I think some amount of kicking is normal, but this would be like excessive amounts. We can also see pain and a sagging sensation, kind of like a bearing down sensation. I think sometimes women, I have some patients that they experience this like right before their period, like this bearing down sensation. That's where we usually like use buzhang, the lifting herbs like chai hu, sheng ma, huang qi to lift things up to counter that sinking. If we see this during pregnancy, that might tell us that we need to be concerned about a possible miscarriage. And in severe cases, there can be bleeding during pregnancy as well. That might be a sign of restless fetus. So we have a list of herbs that can calm restless fetus. And again, there's no category for this. These are scattered throughout a bunch of different categories. And it turns out we can have a couple different things causing restless fetus. So when we say these herbs treat restless fetus, we need to know by which way do they treat restless fetus. So our first one is Zitsuye. Oh, that says tonified qi. That's wrong. I must have copied that from... Sorry, that says Zitsuye, that says tonified qi. That should say warm acid release the exterior. I do this thing where I copy and paste things from previous slides and then I make mistakes. So Zitsuye is from warm acid release the exterior. It not only releases the exterior, it also has a function of regulating middle jiao qi, regulating spleen stomach qi for things like nausea and vomiting. And so we can use that with an external attack. It's also so good at treating nausea and vomiting, we can use it for morning sickness. And it turns out we can also use it for restless fetus due to qi stagnation in the middle jiao. So when you say Zitsuye, by which way does it treat restless fetus? It regulates middle jiao qi to calm the fetus, to calm fetus movements. Huang qin is from the clear, heat, dry, damp category. And this is another one we have to be very careful with our spelling. I'm saying Huang qin, Scutellaria, not Huang Qi astragalus. So make sure you say Huang Qin with an N at the end. And so this is obviously from the clear heat category. So this is for restless fetus due to heat. You know, heat causes things to move around. Heat can cause the blood to move recklessly. Turns out heat can also cause the fetus to move. And if there's too much movement, we worry about a miscarriage. Ji Shang is from, this is a mulberry parasite, mistletoe. Ji Shang is in the category for bee syndrome. But remember, this one also has an action of tonifying blood. So this is something that we say in terms of treating bee syndrome, it tonifies liver and kidney and strengthens the tendons and bones, and that's how it treats bee syndrome. But it also has an action of tonifying blood. So if there's blood deficiency, there's not enough blood nourishing the fetus, or there's blood deficiency causing instability of the ren and the chong, then Ji Shang can tonify blood to calm restless fetus. Sha Ren from the aromatic category. This is also one that it's not only aromatically transforms dampness, it also moves middle jiao qi. It's for middle jiao qi stagnation. So if you have restless fetus due to qi stagnation in the middle jiao, the two we have are Zitsuye and Sha Ren, cardamom seed. Ia is in the stop bleeding category. This one, its way of stopping bleeding is by warming the interior or warming the channels to stop bleeding. It's for bleeding due to deficiency cold. And so, again, we could say this is restless fetus due to cold, or we could also say, especially when we have symptoms like bleeding during pregnancy, IA is something that's warming and also stops bleeding. So we can, if we have bleeding, we might worry about the possibility of miscarriage. Baidu is in the tonified qi category, so restless fetus or threatened miscarriage due to qi deficiency, or we can even say habitual miscarriage. Like I had some patients that it's very easy for them to get pregnant, but then it's happened 3 or 4 times that they get to month 4 and they have a miscarriage. So it's easy to get pregnant, but it's also easy for them to miscarry. And so it could be that we need to tonify qi to prevent miscarriage. And we can also put that in... we can also use that to calm restless fetus. Sorry, I got distracted by... I'm in clinical making the supervisor jealous. Hopefully you're not doing 2 at the same time, like multitasking. I had that happen in a Zoom thing once where we were doing a clinic where one of the students was like logged into 2 different Zooms at the same time, and so Baidu is in the tonified qi category, also calms restless fetus. That's probably an important one. Then the last couple are in the herbs that tonify yang. So these are very common ones. Duzhong, Eucomia cortex. This is the one that it's bark from the rubber tree. So it's really good for the sinews. Shuduan, Dipsaki, Tusitsa is also good for the eyes. But these tonify the kidneys to prevent miscarriage, or tonify the kidneys to calm restless fetus. And it's not necessarily that we need to add yang. Again, this is kind of related that the kidneys are related to the ren and the chong. So we could also say that we have some instability in the ren mai and the chong mai. And so by using these herbs to tonify the kidneys, that can stabilize those channels and stabilize the pregnancy. So those are herbs that we use to calm restless fetus. So those are the ones I can verify with Bensky. After that, we get into some controversial ones. So one of them is jiao. Remember, jiao is donkey gelatin. So jiao is in the tonified blood category. And jiao is special because it tonifies blood, but also stops bleeding. And so it's kind of interesting that it can do both at the same time. And maybe a way you can remember this is we say donkey gelatin is like, that's what we used to make glue out of. When they say they use like horse hooves to make glue, donkey gelatin, we can also call it donkey glue. So you can think about somebody's bleeding, so you glue their skin back together to stop the bleeding. Anyway, so we can say that jiao tonifies blood and also stops bleeding. And so this is something that when you look in Bensky, he says you can use, this is often used for bleeding during pregnancy, but he doesn't actually use the phrase calms restless fetus. With all of those other herbs, he will very explicitly say this herb calms restless fetus as one of its functions. Jiao, he doesn't explicitly say that, but he does, it is used in formulas, and it is used to stop bleeding for vaginal bleeding during pregnancy. So I think it's pretty safe to add it to this list. But maybe if you're going very strictly by the book, that may be an iffy thing. The other one, I've heard people say that Xiangru from the phlegm heat category calms restless fetus. It's kind of like I've heard people say this. I haven't been able to verify it in any book. So if you see this pop up on a list, I've seen that on infographics online and things like this. But when I go and look in Bensky, when I go and look in Chen, and when I go and look at Nigel Weissman and Eric Brand, I don't really see anything about calming restless fetus, so I'm not sure if that's really there or not. But what we do say is Xiangru, it's in the phlegm heat category, but it's also a very good herb for rebellious stomach qi, for nausea and vomiting due to heat. So Xiangru is specifically for nausea and vomiting due to heat. That's very different than nausea and vomiting due to cold. Then we'd use things like Shangjiang and Bansha. So you should remember that Xiangru is for nausea and vomiting due to heat. But it's so good at treating nausea and vomiting that we often use it for morning sickness. And so I think maybe this is where it comes from, that maybe that symptoms of restless fetus or stirring fetus also have morning sickness in them. So I'll see that as a formula modifications for some of our formulas for calming restless fetus. They'll say if there's a lot of morning sickness, you can add in Xiangru to treat the morning sickness. So I'm not sure if it actually calms restless fetus directly or if it's just for the symptoms of morning sickness that go with it. I would say clinically it doesn't matter that much, but it's like if you're answering a question on a test, maybe you want to go very strictly with what's written word for word in Bensky. And as far as I know in Bensky, he does not list this as one of the functions. Yeah, Jiao looks cool. Yeah, I think it comes in cool little bricks. I've seen it two ways. Some of it looks like when you see those gold bullion things, it kind of comes in that. Some it comes in foil packages. So Jiao, remember that since it's gelatin, you don't cook it with the rest of the herbs. If you cook it with the rest of the herbs, it will melt and stick to those herbs, or more likely it will sink to the bottom and just burn on the bottom of the pan. So what we say is just melt it in at the end, stir it in. The thing is, if you just have like a whole brick of jiao, it takes a long time to melt. So usually what I do is I would get them, they would come in like foil packages with a little 10-gram square, is while it's still in the foil, pound it with a hammer and break it up into little pieces and get it as fine as you can, and then stir it into the concoction, and it will melt a little bit easier when it's already in little pieces. But I remember the first time I did it, I just like put this big chunk of jiao in there, and I ended up stirring it for like half an hour before it finally dissolved. So yeah, jiao, I think we can say is another one. So herbs that calm restless fetus. And again, so these are from a bunch of different categories. And so we'll need to know by which way do they calm restless fetus. Zitsuye and Sharen, more about middle jiao qi stagnation. Huangqin, more about heat. Ji Shang, more about blood deficiency. Baidu, more about qi deficiency. And then the Duzhong Shuduan Tu Sitsa, more about kidney deficiency. So we want to know by which way do they calm restless fetus. But we do have certain formulas for calming restless fetus. So one of the famous ones is Taishan Panshirwan. Sometimes I see it as a san, sometimes I see it as a wan. Taishan Panshir san. So the story here is there's a mountain in China. The name of that mountain is Taishan. On Taishan, there is a rock called Panshir. Shir means stone. So it's this giant boulder that's been sitting there for thousands of years, and it's never fallen over. And so what they say is, if you take this formula, your pregnancy will be as stable as the rock on Taishan Mountain. So this is a formula for threatened miscarriage, for frequent, if the patient has a history of miscarriage, this would be for preventing miscarriage. So we see that a bunch of tonifying herbs. This looks like Sejunzatong plus Siwutong. But then we see we just added in a bunch of herbs that calm restless fetus. So in our list before, we had Baidu tonifies qi to calm restless fetus. Shu Duan tonifies the kidney for restless fetus. Huangqin clears heat to calm fetus. Sha Ren moves middle jiao qi to calm fetus. So we basically took Bajian Tong. Then we took out the Fuling, because remember, Fuling has a downward direction. You don't want any downward movement during pregnancy. And then we added a bunch of herbs that calm restless fetus. So this is an example of where these herbs would pop up. Another formula, Baochan Wu Yo Feng, worry-free formula to protect birth. Again, we have some tonifying herbs, and then we just we have some herbs that calm restless fetus, like Tu Sitsa and Ia. Those were two herbs that were on our list for calming restless fetus, and we see them in this formula for this function. This is a good one. Shou Taiwan fetus longevity pill. It's only these 4 herbs, and they all appear on that list of having that function of calm restless fetus. So, again, sometimes when you look at the Bensky single herb book, he doesn't list jiao as being calm restless fetus, but when you look at the formula book under Shou Taiwan, jiao is there to stop bleeding and calm restless fetus. Hope my internet isn't having problems. Look a little bit fuzzy. So those are herbs that calm restless fetus. Kind of in a similar category, we can talk about herbs that promote lactation. So this is something that we can call it Nigel Weissman uses the term scanty breast milk or scant breast milk. I think other books just call it insufficient lactation. So basically, insufficient lactation, mother isn't producing enough breast milk to feed the child, so we need to get more breast milk flowing. So basically in this situation, there are basically two options. One is qi and blood deficiency, that there's just not enough blood or not enough yin substance to form or produce the breast milk. The other possibility is stagnation. You can say liver qi stagnation because the liver governs the breasts. That is, the milk is there, it's just because there's stagnation, it's not flowing. So kind of the main way we can differentiate these two is basically if there's qi and blood deficiency, there's really not going to be any pain because there's just not enough substance to create the breast milk. Whereas with something like liver qi stagnation, you're going to see painful, swollen, distended breast because of that stagnation, that the milk is there, but it's stuck and it's not getting out, so it causes some pain. So it's kind of like excess and deficiency. You should be able to tell by taking the pulse, but then it's also those symptoms. And I feel like this is kind of similar to problems with menses, that if you have like amenorrhea or a situation where a patient says, I'm on day 35 and my period hasn't started yet, basically we get like the two possibilities are deficiency or stagnation. Either there's just not enough blood to form the period, and that's why the period's not coming, or there's stagnation. That is, the blood is there, but because of stagnation, it's not coming out. It got stuck. And so those are our two possibilities. And again, we can differentiate them by blood stagnation will have a lot of pain and PMS symptoms, whereas blood deficiency will not. So sometimes this is kind of a weird question, but I'll ask, how did you know your period's late? If it's like if they were like, I have no symptoms, it's only when I looked on my phone, I looked on the calendar, I said, wow, my period should have come last week, then that might be more like blood deficiency. But if somebody comes in and says, I've been PMSing for 2 weeks, I have all this abdominal pain, I feel like my period should be coming, but it's just not coming, then it's more likely stagnation. So the same kind of thing happens with lactation, and I really need to stop gesturing like this when I talk about promoting lactation. Oh, sorry, microphone. So promoting lactation, Ruzheshao. I feel like that technically means, in Chinese, that means juice. So calling it breast juice, I think is kind of funny. But Nigel Weissman will say scant breast milk. Most other people will just say insufficient lactation. Basically, there's not enough milk to nourish the child. Our two possibilities are qi and blood deficiency or liver qi stagnation. And so that's, again, we want to know when we're talking about insufficient lactation, we need to know what the cause, and then when we look at the herbs, we need to know by which way are we promoting lactation. I'd say qi and blood deficiency, we don't have a lot of specific herbs. If we have qi and blood deficiency, we just give general qi and blood tonics like Suwu Tong, Bajin Tong, things like that. But with liver qi stagnation, we do have some specific herbs. So we might give a general formula like Xiao Yao San, but then add in some herbs for specifically promoting lactation. So we have a couple here. Again, they tend to be from different categories. So Mu Tong is from the drain dampness category. And so this one, the way I remember this one is tong, first tone, means free flow or unblock. Like we have that saying, butong za tong, tong za butong, where there's stagnation, there's pain, where there's pain, there's stagnation. The tong, first tone, means free flow or unblocking. So that describes the functions of mu tong. It unblocks urination so that the urine can flow smoothly. It unblocks the channels to treat B syndrome, and also unblocks the nipples to promote lactation, or so that the breast milk can flow freely. Again, I really need to stop gesturing from my nipples. So Mutong, it is all about unblocking and free flow. Dong Quetza is in that same category, and Dong Quetza, we can call it Dong Quetza or Dong Quei Guo. It's again in that drain dampness category. And this one we just say in general benefits the breast. So we can use it for early stage breast abscess or swelling of the breast, but we can also use it for promoting lactation. So again, both of these are about promoting the free flow. So they're more about treating poor lactation due to stagnation. Wang Bu Liuxing is in the invigorate blood category. This is the one that Wang means king. Bu Liuxing, like Xing means to walk. So this is the one that even the king will not stop it from moving. So if Wang Bu Liuxing is walking by the king, normally when you see the king or the emperor, you would have to stop and bow. But Wang Bu Liuxing is so moving that even if it sees the king, it can't stop. It just keeps moving. So Wang Bu Liuxing is very good at promoting movement. So it's good for promoting lactation in cases of stagnation. So Mutong, Dong Kuizi, and Wang Bu Liuxing, we would say they're more for treating poor lactation due to stagnation. Heizhima is in the Tonify Yin category. So this would be more about poor lactation due to qi and blood deficiency. And I think the reason we say this here is just because it's very easy to use in food therapy. So this is something that pregnancy, giving birth, and breastfeeding are all very draining on the blood. And so it could be that during pregnancy, after pregnancy, you would want to be making sure that you're eating enough foods to nourish blood, and Heizhima is one of those things. So I think it's really just more that Heizhima is a general good tonic for blood and yin, and it's really easy to take. So we say it's also very good for breastfeeding women. It's also very oily, so it can moisten the large intestine, and that can be important. It's very common to have constipation after giving birth as well, just because so much blood is lost that it fails to moisten the intestine. So Heizhima black sesame can be very good for that as well. So those are our promote lactation. Oh yeah, and this is also, these are some weird ones that I've seen listed and I'm not so sure about. Pugong Ying from the heat toxicity category, and Mang Xiao from the purgative category. Mang Xiao is salt. Pugong Ying is dandelion. So Pugong Ying is another one that I've seen this on lists that some people make, that they say that Pugong Ying can promote lactation. Again, when I go to Bensky, when I go to Chen, when I look in the books, it doesn't specifically say promotes lactation. However, Pugong Ying is very famous for treating breast abscess. It can be used internally or applied externally as a poultice to treat breast abscess and mastitis. So I think when we say Pugong Ying promotes lactation, we're specifically talking about if there's swelling, mastitis, breast abscess, and that's associated with the blockage or the poor lactation, then Pugong Ying could be good. But I would say if there aren't those symptoms of heat toxicity, I wouldn't necessarily use it. Mang Xiao is another one that Bensky does say it promotes lactation, but he says it at the end of this long paragraph where he's again talking about breast abscess. So Mang Xiao is salt. It's a strong laxative. It purges the large intestine. However, it can be applied externally for heat toxicity like mastitis and breast abscess. So I'd say when he says it promotes lactation, I would say that's more if the patient has mastitis or breast abscess, then it might be appropriate. I think he's talking about applying it externally. It's like don't give strong purgatives to deficient people after pregnancy. So those are two other ones that you might see pop up. Maya, we should talk about Maya. Maya is in the food stagnation category. Maya is sprouted rice. Sprouted wheat, sorry. I think it's sprouted wheat or sprouted. It's some sort of sprouted grain. I think guya is sprouted rice, and maya might be sprouted barley or sprouted wheat, depending on where in China you are. Anyway, maya, we want to talk about it here because actually maya has a very famous action of stopping lactation. And so if you get a question about maya and lactation, we should say that maya in large dosages can stop lactation. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes you have patients that they want to stop breastfeeding, but the breast milk still keeps coming out. Then you can give them large dosages of maya to stop lactation. This can also be a bad thing, that if the mother wants to be breastfeeding, then make sure you avoid giving them maya. So when we talk about lactation, that's usually the thing that comes up. However, there is a saying in some books that small dosages of maya promote lactation. large dosages of Maya stop lactation. So that's something we can talk about here. We can add it to this list because we do say that small dosages can promote lactation. But usually if you see this come up on a test, it's going to be large dosages stop lactation. When we say large, we're talking about 30 to 60 grams, even 120 grams of Maya per day can stop lactation. So that's kind of an interesting caution contraindication. So sometimes that comes up on tests a lot. So those are our promote lactation herbs. Oh, and this is an interesting one. Tu Bie Chong, I think we usually don't learn this on our syllabus, but it is an herb you can buy. We often stock it in our pharmacies, and it is in Bensky. Tu Bie Chong is wingless cockroach. So Tu Bie Chong is in the invigorate blood category. It also has an action of like knitting the sinews back together. It's good for injury and trauma. But I just think this is a funny excerpt from Bensky where this Chinese physician, Ko Zongshi, says, if the breast milk does not flow, grind one cockroach, Tu Bie Chong, grind one and boil in half a cup of water, then filter it clear. Have the patient drink it, but don't tell her what it is. So that's an interesting remedy for poor lactation, specifically due to stagnation. Next, we can talk about herbs that brighten the eyes. Oh man, we've been doing this for an hour and 15 minutes. We can talk about herbs that brighten the eyes. So when you say brighten the eyes, we're talking about eye problems. And so again, there are different causes of eye problems. We can talk about different patterns, and we can say, by which way do we brighten the eyes? So when you talk about eye problems, we can say dry eyes, red eyes, itchy eyes, basically like physical problems with the eye, like irritation of the eye. But we can also talk about vision problems, like diminished vision, blurred vision, or poor night vision. Those all fall under the category of brightening the eyes. Sorry, I live like right next to a hospital, so I get ambulances driving by all the time. So this is, we have a lot of different herbs with the action brighten the eyes, but we need to know by which way does it brighten the eyes. So eye problems can come from basically from wind heat. That when wind heat gets up into the face, it can cause red eyes, itchy eyes, dry eyes. We can talk about liver heat, liver fire, that when there's heat in the liver channel, remember the liver opens to the eyes or connects to the eyes, or the liver governs the eyes. So when you have heat in the liver channel, that can go up into the eyes and cause red eyes. Or we can also have yin and blood deficiency. Remember, the liver governs the eye, so if you have liver yin deficiency or liver blood deficiency, that yin and blood can fail to nourish the eye, so we can end up with dryness, or we can end up with vision problems like poor vision, blurred vision. So again, we have a lot of different herbs, but we need to know by which way do they brighten eyes. So Ming Mu, Ming means brighten, so it's kind of like Yang Ming is the Yang brightness channel. So when you say Ming Mu, that means brighten the eyes. And so this is some a phrase that comes up a lot with herbs. So again, we can have wind heat. So basically like an external attack of wind heat causing red eyes, itchy eyes, irritated eyes. I think seasonal allergies can fall under this when you have like really itchy eyes because of the external environment. I think this falls under that category. Or just you have a wind heat attack, like you have a sore throat and runny nose, and you have itchy eyes. That could be wind heat causing eye issues. Liver heat, liver fire, liver yang rising. When you have heat in the liver channel, it goes up into the eyes. So a lot of times like red eyes, bloodshot eyes. Think about a person who's really stressed out and drank 5 cups of coffee, and they have that like twitching eye, and they have these red bloodshot eyes. That might be liver heat. Someone who's like red in the face. Or yin and blood deficiency. Remember, the liver goes to the eye, so if there's insufficient liver yin or insufficient liver blood to nourish the eyes, one, the eyes could dry out, or we could have decreased visual acuity, blurred vision, floaters in the vision, poor night vision, things like that. So we have a lot of herbs that have the function of brightening the eyes. So our first one is wind heat. Not surprisingly, these herbs are from the category cool acid release the exterior. They're treating wind heat, but specifically for eye problems. So we have Bohe is mint leaf. Remember, this one just like opens up all of the face. It's very aromatic, so we use it for like opening up It's good for the throat, it's good for the nose, it's good for all the orifices of the face, including the eyes. Chan Tui is cicada skin, and so that one, it's really good for the skin. It's the skin of the cicada, so it's good for the skin, so it's good for rashes due to wind heat, but it's also good for the eyes. This one, I think, is a very common remedy for chickenpox, or was a common remedy in China for chickenpox, using it externally as a wash. And they would also say that they would use this to prevent the pox from getting into the eyes, because that could cause serious problems and potentially blindness. So you could use Chan Tui as a wash to protect the eyes from chickenpox. Sangye and Juhua are very famous ones. Sangye is mulberry leaf, Juhua is chrysanthemum flower, and so this is for wind heat attack with eye problems. So we have the formula Sangju Yin. Sangju Yin, Sang means Sangye, Ju means Juhua, and that's for wind heat attack when the major symptoms are cough and eye problems. Manjingza is good for the face in general. Mutse, I feel like Mutse isn't used very much. Mutse used to not be on my syllabus, and then they added it one year, but Mutse pretty much only brightens the eyes. I think it can also stop bleeding due to blood heat, but it's mainly used for brightening the eyes, for wind heat or liver heat. But it's never the chief herb in an ingredient in a formula. So this is more of I think this is usually used more of a secondary herb. So those are the ones that brighten eyes, and so this might be good to know that this is kind of like a subcategory within the cool lacquered release the exterior category, that we have a certain group of herbs that clear wind heat to brighten eyes. We can maybe also point out that not everything goes into just one category. And so some of these can do multiple things depending on what we combine them with. So for like Juhua is very famous for brightening the eyes. We usually use it for wind heat, but we can also use it for liver heat, and we can also use it for blood deficiency, just if it's combined with other herbs that tonify blood. So these aren't like rigid categories. So these aren't like rigid categories. They can do multiple things. So we can also talk about clearing liver heat to brighten eyes. And so again, the liver channel connects to the eyes. If we have heat in the liver channel, it goes up into the eye, causes redness, bloodshot eyes, things like that. Shakutao and Jue Mingza are from the drain fire category. Remember, these are two that are also just good for general liver yang rising. They both lower high blood pressure. So a lot of the herbs that we see here are good for just clearing liver heat in general, and that includes brightening the eyes. Chichienza is in the drain dampness category, which is kind of weird. But this is one that I think we can use it either for liver heat, or we can use it for liver and kidney deficiency, depending on what it's combined with. Then we have a bunch of herbs that are either in the anchor, settle, and calm category, or from the calm the liver and extinguish wind category. So again, this should make sense that when we talk about eye problems due to liver heat, we have a lot of heat floating upwards into the eyes. So we use herbs that clear liver heat, or herbs that anchor things down to clear the eyes. So Zhenju is pearl. It's a heavy substance that anchors. Lingyangjiao is antelope horn. It's a heavy substance that anchors. Tijili is not a mineral, but it also clears heat and extinguishes wind. Sushur is magnetite, hematite or magnetite, I can't remember. Sushur is a mineral that's heavy. Shizhuiming is abalone shell. Shizhuiming is very famous for brightening the eyes, but these are all heavy anchoring things that gets that yang out of the head and also clears heat. So that's the way we can use them to brighten eyes. So here we have a large group of herbs that clear liver heat to brighten eyes. Then the other thing we can talk about is tonifying yin and blood to brighten eyes. So again, if there's not enough yin or blood nourishing the eyes can dry out, or we can get vision problems. So most famous one is gochitsu, which is goji berry. So this is one that we can use it in decoction, boiled, or we can use it as food therapy. You can like put it in your kanji, put it in your oatmeal. So this is very common that if you have a person with eye problems, you can just tell them to snack on some goji berries. I usually don't do that because they're very sticky and cloying, and they can easily cause digestive problems, so I prefer to cook them, but some people will just snack on them and it will help them. But so all of these are from tonifying category. So gochita is from tonify blood or tonify yin, depending on what book you're reading. Tusutsa, tonify yang, but tonifies the kidneys. Nujenza, tonify yin. Fupenza, tonify yang. The interesting one here is Xiangru is from the category aromatic transform dampness. And that's weird, because we don't really think of Xiangru as tonifying. And so I think what's happening here is originally the recommendation was to eat, I can't remember if it was liver or kidney. I think it was eat pork kidney, basically eat an organ meat with Xiangru, and that will help with eye problems. So some people say, oh, the Xiangru is there, but it's not really, the Xiangru isn't really helping your eyes. It's the organ meat that's helping nourish the eyes, but that's a remedy that kind of goes together. So I think that's why we say Xiangru brightens the eyes. So those are herbs that brighten the eyes. And again, these aren't really rigid categories. A lot of them can do multiple things depending on how we combine them. So it's very common to combine juhua with gochita. You can either drink that by itself as a tea or in the formula qi ju di huang wan, which is the formula for tonifying yin to brighten eyes. Oh, I haven't heard of that. Someone's saying shui ju cha. I'm assuming cha means tea. Shui probably means blood. Yeah, and I think this is a similar thing where I had a teacher who would sometimes say they would just use juhua and gochita together, and like you don't have to. It's not like you have to boil it for half an hour. You can just pour hot water on it, and it makes a tea. It's a very beautiful color, and it's the gochita is kind of sweet, so it's very easy to drink as a tea. It like actually tastes good, so it's like. If you're in a spring season where there's a lot of wind and you tend to get eye problems, this can be a thing that you have. Juhua guides the herbs to the eyes, but also kind of releases the exterior, and then you have the gochita nourishing the yin to make sure they don't dry out. So that's a very common combination. So I'm sure it's that might be similar. Headache. Let's talk about headache, because we have a bunch of herbs with the function of clearing headache. I hope we're almost done. I'm not used to talking for this long anymore. So we talk about headache. First of all, there are a lot of causes of headache. Basically, every pattern can cause headache. So it's not like with these other things you can say, oh, it's either blood deficiency or qi stagnation. Like everything can cause headache. So you need to look at the other signs and symptoms to see what the root cause is. But we do have certain herbs that treat headache. And a lot of times when we talk about headache, we're not just talking about the causes of headaches. We can also differentiate headaches by the location. And we'll assign it one of the 6 channels based on its location. So like for frontal headache, we'll say that's a yang ming headache. For temporal headache, we'll say that's a xiao yang headache. For occipital headache in the back of the head and the neck, we'll say that's a tai yang headache. For pain at the vertex, we'll say that's a jue yin headache. So we can refer to these headaches by their location, just because those channels go to those locations. We don't really talk about tai yin or xiao yin headaches just because those channels don't really go to the head. I mean, lung and spleen don't really go to the head, so it's not quite the same. Xiao yin, same thing. So when we talk about the location, we mainly talk about Taiyang, Yangming, Xiaoyang, and then Jueyin for the vertex, because the liver channel has a branch that goes to the vertex. So we can talk about there are specific herbs that treat specific types of headache, and that's something we can talk about. Yeah, so this is based on the 6 channels. So Taiyang headache is occipital headache. Remember when we say Taiyang, we're talking about UB and SI, and that's where those channels go to the neck and shoulders or the back of the head. We have like UB10 is right on the back of the head, and then the SI channel goes to kind of the shoulders and shoulder blade area. So if you have headache at the head that extends down the neck and into the shoulders, we can call that a Taiyang headache. Yangming headache, when we say Yangming, we mean large intestine and stomach. So remember the large intestine channel goes to the nose, and then it goes up to the eye to start the stomach channel, and then it wraps up. Stomach 8 is at the corner of the head. I'm pretty sure we have a branch that goes to the midline. So when we're talking about the forehead and the eyebrows, that would be a Yangming headache because that's where the stomach channel is. If people talk about sinus things, I would still consider that Yangming just because of the large intestine channel. Like this is the large intestine and stomach channel right in there. So that's Yangming headache. Those channels go to the front of the face. So when you have frontal headache, that's a Yangming headache. Shaoyang, remember Shaoyang means gallbladder and sanjiao, and those channels make those loops over the ear. So temporal headache, headache on the side of the head is Shaoyang headache. Tai-yin headache, again, like the Tai-yin channels don't really go to the head so much. So we say pain and heaviness in the head with abdominal fullness. So I think when we say Tai-yin headache, what we're actually talking about here is if somebody has Tai-yin syndrome, according to Shanghan Lun, six levels, and if they have Tai-yin syndrome and they're experiencing headache, then we call it a Tai-yin headache. But maybe a way you can think of this is remember Tai-yin, the spleen belongs to Tai-yin. The spleen is averse to dampness, so heaviness in the head and abdominal fullness sound like damp things. So that's maybe how can you remember Tai-yin headache is heavy head and abdominal fullness. Shaoyin headache, again, I don't think those channels really go to the head. We're talking more about the headache during Shaoyin syndrome. So we say a splitting headache or headache that goes in deep and also connects to the teeth. So maybe a way to remember this is Shaoyin involves the kidney channel. The kidney governs the bones, and that includes the teeth. So if you have a Shaoyin headache, that might include the teeth. And then Jueyin is vertex headache because the liver channel has a branch that goes to the vertex to do 20. We also say with retching because it's like that's one of the key symptoms of Jueyin syndrome in the Shanghan Lun is vomiting roundworms. So if we have a vertex headache with Jueyin syndrome, we can call that a Jueyin headache. So we have a bunch of herbs that can treat headache. And so this is maybe we can just know that these herbs treat headache, or we can go a step further and say what kind of headache do they treat. So Chuanchang is kind of interesting because some books will say that Chuanchang is for Shaoyang headache, the temporal headache, or for headache due to blood deficiency. But really, other places will say that Chuanchang is for any type of headache anywhere on the head due to any cause. It just depends on what you combine it with. So if you have headache due to wind cold, you combine it with herbs that release the exterior. If you have headache due to blood deficiency, you combine it with herbs that tonify blood. And so this, when you get into formulas and formula modifications, this is going to be really common. Like almost every formula has this modification. If there's also headache, add Chuanchang. So Chuanchang is our really common headache formula. So you could say it's for Shaoyang and blood deficiency headache, but really it's for all types of headache. Baizhi is for Yangming headache. Remember, Baizhi belongs to the category warm, acrid, release the exterior, and Baizhi is the one that also opens the nasal orifices. So I think that's how I remember this one, is Baizhi is the one that smells like pancakes. It smells like maple syrup. It has a very strong smell, and it opens the nose. And you can think that the sinuses are kind of on the front of the head, so it kind of makes sense that opening the sinuses and treating frontal headache go together. So Baizhi is specifically for Yangming headache. Qianghu is also in that category. Qianghu treats Taiyang headache. Qianghu is the one that's usually for dampness, when we have an external attack of wind cold with accompanying signs of dampness. But we also say that it's a guiding herb to the Taiyang channel and the Du channel. And both the Taiyang channel goes to the back of the neck, and the Du channel goes to the back of the neck and the occiput. So Qianghu can be very good for Taiyang occipital headache. Gaoben is interesting, also in the warm, acrid, release the exterior category. This one's interesting because we say it treats vertex headache, but we have to be careful. Bensky makes this kind of nitpicky point that we don't really call this Jueyin headache, or if we do it, we have to differentiate. It's not the same as headache that happens during Jueyin syndrome, Shanghan Lun style. So Gaoben is for headache that occurs during a wind cold attack when it's the vertex headache and goes down into the teeth. And so I didn't want to put down Jueyin headache because if we're treating a Jueyin syndrome headache where we have liver and pericardium and vomiting roundworms, then we would go to Wuju Yu. We would not use Gaoben. Gaoben is for headache that happens on the vertex, but it's during an external attack, not a deep, not cold damage at the Jueyin level. But this one is kind of interesting also because in the books it doesn't enter the liver channel or it doesn't enter the Jueyin channels. Gaoben is the one that's really interesting that it enters the Du channel. And so remember the Du channel or the governing vessel goes up and goes to the vertex. So maybe that's how you can remember that. Gaoben enters the Du channel. It's good for acute low back pain because that's where the Du channel goes. It's also good for vertex headache because that's where the Du channel goes. Yeah, Chinese medicine can be a real pain because so many things are pronounced the same way or almost the same way. Yeah, that's really true. It also doesn't help that my pronunciation is not that great, especially because I don't use the proper tones. So I'm probably really confusing the Chinese people because I should be saying, this is third tones in a row. Gao Ben. But yeah, like we said before, we have like Ru Xiang and Xiangru. It's very easy to get them confused. So Gaoben for vertex headache, some books will just say it's for Jueyin headache, but we should just point out that it's not for headache during Jueyin syndrome. It's for vertex headache that happens during a wind cold attack. Chai Hu is for Shaoyang temporal headache. This shouldn't be surprising. Chai Hu is our number one herb for harmonizing the Shaoyang, so alternating fever and chills. It's good for moving liver qi, so it shouldn't be surprising that it treats Shaoyang headache. Tangju is for Taiyin headache. Again, this is headache with heaviness in the head and abdominal fullness. So Sangju is just enters the spleen channel. It's a guiding herb to the spleen channel, and it's good for dampness. So maybe that's how we can think of it as a Taiyin headache. Xixin for Shaoyin headache. This one is interesting. Xixin, we could say it's for that Shaoyin headache, or we also say it's just for any type of headache that happens during a wind cold attack. So Xixin is the one that it's very warm and it's very acrid. Some books put it in the warm, acrid, release the exterior category. Some herbs put it in the warm the interior category because it does both. So this is good just whenever you have headache due to wind cold, you can use Xixin, or you can say it's specifically for Shaoyin headache. Wujuyu is the one that stops vomiting. So we say Wujuyu stop vomiting. This is for Jueyin headache. So again, this would be headache during Jueyin level syndrome in Shanghan Lun. So this one warms the exterior, it warms the liver channel. It also stops vomiting because you're vomiting roundworms, and this is why we said headache with retching because Wujuyu stops vomiting. So this Wujuyu is for Jueyin headache. So that's our list of herbs that stop headache. Again, they treat different types of headache sometimes, and they're spread across a bunch of different categories. We don't just have a headache category. So this is an example of where some of these herbs come up. We have this formula called Chuanchong Cha Tiao San, Chuanchong powder to be taken with green tea. And so this is for an external attack of wind cold when the main symptom is headache. And you can see that a lot of our headache herbs show up here. So we do have some herbs that just release the exterior, like Bohe, Jingjie, Fangfeng. Those all just release the exterior. But then we have a bunch of headache herbs. So we have Chuanchong, which can treat headache anywhere. We have Baizhi, that treats Yangming headache. We have Qianghuo, which treats occipital headache. We have Xixin, that we could say is for Shaoyin, but Xixin is just really for headache anywhere when there's a wind cold attack. So we have these herbs combined together, and together they treat headache anywhere on the head. And so this is the formula for headache during a wind cold attack. So that's an example of these herbs being used. Again, sometimes you'll just see this in formula modifications where they'll say, if there's headache, add 9 grams of Chuanchong. Oh, are we almost done? Because if we're not, I might need to take a break. So this is kind of a weird category. A lot of people ask about these, and so I just wanted to mention it briefly. Sometimes we have herbs that either lower high blood pressure or lower high cholesterol or do both. And this can be a difficult list of herbs to compile just because we don't really... it's not really a traditional indication saying high blood pressure. It's like Zhong Zhongjing didn't have a sphygmomanometer and he didn't have a blood pressure machine. So it's like they weren't really measuring blood pressure back in the day. So a lot of these herbs, when we say they lower high blood pressure, that's based on modern research. And so what that also means is different books will say different things. So it depends on which book you go to. And if you trust the study, like was this actually a good study or was it just a trial run on 25 people? But I thought I would mention these because this does come up. Some of them, this is not a complete list. This is just a shorter list, and I feel like these are the ones that come up more commonly when we talk about blood pressure. So Shanjia is probably a very common one. Shanjia is from the food stagnation category. Shanjia is hawthorn berry. And this one does both high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And I would say this is one of the more famous ones. This is one that you can actually find in health food stores just as a pill that people will take hawthorn berry for this purpose, even if they don't know anything about Chinese medicine. Then we have these ones, Xiakucao and Juemingzi. We talked about this in the brightening eyes, and these are both herbs that clear liver heat and subdue liver yang rising, and so it makes sense that they would treat high blood pressure, just because high blood pressure is kind of like liver yang rising. Xiakucao is one that you can make individually as a tea. You can just pour boiling water on it. The thing is you need a lot of it and it's very fluffy. So if you actually get like 15 grams of xiakucao, it's going to fill up your entire water bottle. So it can be kind of annoying, but it is something that you can just keep refilling it and drink it as tea. Sangji, Xixiancao, and Ji Shang are all from the B syndrome category. So these all lower high blood pressure. They might also lower high cholesterol as well. I think it depends on who you look at. So some of these, it depends on what source you're reading. I think sometimes Chen mention some studies where these lower high blood pressure. Duzhong, Eucomia cortex, the bark of the rubber tree is a very famous one for lowering high blood pressure. And then again, we have a bunch of things for anchoring liver yang rising or extinguishing wind. So Gotang Tianma, Shizhuiming, Gotang Tianma in the extinguished wind category. So again, it kind of makes sense that liver yang rising causing wind, that wind can cause a stroke. It kind of makes sense that these have something to do with blood pressure when you look at it that way. So that was just kind of the point I was trying to make, that a lot of these high blood pressure ones have something to do with the liver channel and liver yang rising. So those kind of go together. Yeah, David says you can get Shanjia candies to eat after meals. Yeah, I think some of them call it like haw flakes, haw as in hawthorn. So that's kind of a good, yeah, and Shanjia has a very sour taste. So a lot of times that's used as like a digestive thing. So that's another thing. You can take it as a candy. So Shanjia is very common. And then you can also get it in, it's pretty easy to find in pill form. And it's also something that if you want to give patients, it's pretty easy to take, even if they just take it as a tea, because it's kind of sweet and kind of sour. It's not too offensive to take. Yeah, Gotong is, I believe that is cat's claw. Uncaria, it might be a slightly different, like it might be in the same family, but a different species, but it's but the Latin name is Uncaria, and that's the same as cat's claw. So I think it is the same as cat's claw. Cat's claw being the plant, not the actual cat. So that's a good question. So those are some blood pressure, cholesterol things. And again, this is not a complete list. If you went through the Materia Medica, there are a lot of other ones, and some of them are kind of weird, like you wouldn't expect. Like I think Daji does it, Huaimi does it, things like that. But I feel like these are the more common ones that you'll see. Kill parasites. I think this is the last one, which is good because I need to take a break soon. So this is another common function we see. We have herbs that kill parasites. And so here we have to be careful because in Chinese medicine, when we say parasites, we mean two things. We can say like external parasites, as in like itchy skin. Those are considered parasites. Or we can say internal parasites, as in intestinal parasites. Roundworms, pinworms, tapeworms. There's some other ones with funny names that I hadn't heard of before. Their common names are really weird, but schistosomiasis is one that has a more common name that I can't remember. So those are internal parasites. So basically, some are good for skin infection, like itchy skin, and some are good for actual parasites you can see coming out. And so we have some herbs that do one or the other, and some herbs that do both. And again, this is something that we actually have a category of herbs that kill parasites, with like daswan, garlic, and shurjunza. And so we have a very short category of herbs that kill parasites, but more commonly we have a lot of herbs spread throughout the other categories that also have an action of killing parasites. So we have these two types, like itchy skin fungal infections, and we have real intestinal parasites. And sometimes a way to differentiate them, what they're talking about, is if you're reading a book that's very precise with its language, when we say kill parasites, that means skin infection, fungal infection. When we say expel parasites, then we're talking about roundworm, pinworm, tapeworm, intestinal parasites. So there's actually two different terms, kill parasites versus expel parasites. But a lot of books in their translations, they don't make that differentiation, so you have to be careful. But if you're like reading Nigel Weissman, he'll make that difference. So here's just a list. If you want, we can just know that these herbs are good for either killing parasites, and they can be used topically on the skin, or they're good for expelling parasites, like internal parasites. So it could be that it's just good enough to know this list, that these all are good for parasites. If we want, we can very quickly go through and see what kind of parasites they kill. Kushan, I can't remember if this one has a common name. Ku means bitter. Kushan is bitter root. Kushan is specifically used for we say itchy skin, but more like itchy genitals. It tends to be more commonly used for. So this is in the especially good when there's dampness. So Kushan, it's usually used externally as a wash. If you've ever seen the patent Yin Care, which is a pre-made formula that you can like apply externally with a cotton ball. It also comes, you can use it as a douche. Kushan is one of the ingredients there. But yeah, a lot of times for genital itching. So like one time one of my students was like, oh, I remember that Kushan is good for your cooch. And I thought that was kind of weird, but like she said that and now I remember it forever. So maybe that's a way you can remember that. Kushan is good for genital itching. Lu Hui is aloe. And just remember when we say aloe, when we talk about Lu Hui, we're not talking about aloe vera gel. We're talking about the dried latex from the outer layers of the skin. And so that's why if you get a sample, it's not green, it's black. It looks dried. So Lu Hui is in the purgative category, and so it's good for roundworms. So basically, it purges a large intestine, and it can just push the worms right out. It says it can also be used externally for tinea. When you say tinea, that's like athlete's foot. It's a fungal infection, but it can be in various places. So you can have like athlete's foot in your armpit, and we just call it tinea. But Lu Hui, again, it's very rubbery. I'm not sure how you apply it externally. Bien Shu is in the drain damp category, so we can use that internally for worms, roundworm, tapeworm, pinworm, any type of worm. We can use it externally for, again, tinea, so fungal infections like athlete's foot. Haitong Pi is, I believe Bensky puts that in the B syndrome category. Other books put it in different categories, but Haitong Pi can be used for hot B syndrome. It also treats scabies. Scabies is a rash, but it's a rash caused by microscopic mites burrowing into the skin. So this can be applied externally. Huajiao is Sichuan peppercorn. It's also called Chuanjiao. I'm not sure if our person from Chengdu is still there, but Huajiao is Sichuan peppercorn. I feel like this is more commonly used externally for like fungal infections. This is something that you can boil it in a decoction and then soak things in it. So like if you have athlete's foot, you could soak your foot in it, or if you have a fungal infection, you can apply it as a wash. I think it can be technically used for roundworms, but I think it's more like an auxiliary thing. This is like huajiao is in the warm the interior category. So it's very common that you'll have roundworms will go along with interior cold. So huajiao is more about warming the interior. I'm not sure it's so much about killing the parasites. Let me come back to that one. Chuanlianzi, this is in the regulate qi category. It moves liver qi, but we can also use it for parasites. This is one treats roundworm and tapeworm, but again, what Bensky will say is it doesn't do a good job of killing the parasites, but just because Chuanlianzi is good for moving qi, it's good for stopping pain. And so a lot of times having a parasite will come along with intestinal or will come along with abdominal pain. So Chuanlianzi can treat the pain and maybe also kind of kill the parasites. Chuanlianzi is also can be used externally for itchy scalp. Oh, this is good. You can use Sichuan peppercorn. It can also it kind of has that numbing effect on your mouth too, so that's good. That's why I like a lot of foods with huajiao, Sichuan peppercorn. Like I think Hui Guo Ro has Sichuan peppercorn in it. The other one, I don't think Ganbian Sujido I think doesn't, but I still like Ganbian Sujido. But twice cooked pork, I believe, has Sichuan peppercorn in it. Anyway, herbs, not food. Xianhutsao can be used for tapeworm. Xianhutsao, I think, is in the stop bleeding category. It can be used internally for tapeworm. It can also be used for Trichomonas vaginalis, and this is like a parasite. It turns out I think both men and women can get this parasite, but only women will show symptoms of it. So I think it looks kind of like itchiness and vaginal discharge, but it's actually due to a parasite. So Xianhutsao can be used externally for that. Baidu can be used for pinworm. I want to say this is the one that you like make a decoction and you like use it as like you insert it and hold it in the anus. I'm trying to think, enema is the word I was trying to think of, not a douche, an enema. So it's like you can use it as a retained enema to kill pinworms. I'm not sure how common that is, but it's also used for fleas, lice, and itchy skin, itchy genitals. Oof. Sorry, Toe. The way I remember this one is, I don't know if you're in acupuncture, we have an extra point called Bai Chong Wu, which is just above spleen 10. Bai Chong Wu means 100 insect burrow, and so that's a point for itchy skin. Bai Bu means 100 parts, and so for some reason, just that they both have the word 100 in them, they both have the word bai. Somehow I remember that for Bai Bu treats fleas and lice, because insects. Wu Mei, of course, is good for roundworms because Wu Mei is our representative herb for Jueyin syndrome, and the thing that everybody remembers about Jueyin syndrome is vomiting roundworms, so we could use Wu Mei for roundworms. I believe in that formula, huajiao is also there. Again, but it's kind of there to kill roundworms, but it's also there just to warm the interior. So Wu Mei Wan has both Wu Mei and huajiao because they both are good for roundworms. Chunpi can be used internally for roundworms or for itchy skin. Those are both Wu Mei and Chunpi are in the stabilize and bind category. So again, maybe you can remember all of these things if you want to know, is it better for pinworms or is it better for roundworms? But I feel like most testing situations, it might just be good to know that these are good for parasites. Oh, good. I was right. Ganbian Sujito has Sichuan peppercorn. And then somebody told me, I had a teacher tell me that the stuff you get in America is just not that good. That I would go to the Asian market and get Huajiao, and he said no, the color's not right, the flavor's not right. So whenever he would go to China, he would make sure to stock up on Huajiao because he couldn't get good Huajiao there. Is that all we? Is that? Am I done? I think I'm done with that. What is goose syndrome? I have to look that up specifically, but I think it's just like a general term for parasites. If you have Bensky, I remember seeing it in I believe it's in the glossary of Bensky, and it's also in the Nigel Weissman dictionary, but it's one of those things that I look it up and then I forget it right away, but I think it's just a general term for parasites. I'm not sure if it has specific connotations to it. There was something else I wanted to get back to. Oh yeah, this one. This is a question. That was a good question. I didn't want to forget it. With killing parasites, would you always use it externally, or can it be? Can you drink it as well? Yes, it depends on the herb, and sometimes sometimes you just use it externally as a soak. Sometimes you can use it. You can drink it internally as well. So for like the internal parasites, definitely you would take it internally. But some of them you would only just use it as like a wash or a soak. Some of them can also be taken internally. It kind of depends on the herb, and that's something that we'd want to look up first. Yeah, Sorry, I'm coming back to this goose syndrome thing. Yeah, because I feel like it's kind of has to do with like parasites, but also has to do with being possessed by a ghost or like possession, and it's kind of like the two go together. And I feel like I've seen people who have like webinars and stuff about it, and I've just never looked into it that much. So I think it's like a combination of parasites with certain Shen problems that they would call possession. So I actually don't know a whole lot about it. I think there are people who are I think maybe even 5-element people get more into that, and that's just something I don't know a whole lot about. So that's something maybe I can research and look back to you. So maybe the next time we do a live stream, I'll go dig up some stuff about that. But yeah, that's a really good question. Is that all I have for my slides? I think that's all I have, which is good. We've been going at this for a while, almost 2 hours. So hopefully that's helpful. I can't remember if I have anything else. Hopefully that's helpful. Just going through some of those secondary functions. And so that's something that I'm not sure if Bensky has a good list for these, but if you have the H.B. Kim book, his handbook, the big book, not the little clinic guide that you put in your lab coat pocket, but the big handbook of Chinese medicine, he has a section in the back where he just lists them. They're just in tables, so you might have to go back through and look at more of the specifics, but he has some lists of tables, so that can be something good to look at when you're studying, when you're getting to year ends, when you're getting to board exams, and you kind of need to look at more of the big picture. It can be sometimes be good to group things together based on these common functions if they're not in the same category. So I just went over some of the more common ones, like we did like headache, summer heat, promote lactation, things like that. I feel like those are the ones you see a little bit more commonly. And they're also ones that tend to span across multiple different categories. You can look at additional things like herbs that promote urination or herbs that treat jaundice, but they tend to be stuck closer together in the same category. Or they just all come up in, it's like they maybe have this common function, but it's pretty much we only use them in one formula. So like we have herbs that treat jaundice, so yin, chen hao, da huang, and zhizhi are all good for jaundice. But it turns out they like just all show up together in one formula, and that's kind of the time they're used. So that might be useful to go through some of the other ones and kind of make some notes, but those are the more common ones. Let's just see if we have any more questions. Yeah, next week we'll probably just do a general Q&A, and so I can get back to that. I think there are some questions from the video last week, and I'll bring those into the next one, and we'll just do a general Q&A. This one I just want to do some review of herbs, so I'll try to dig up some stuff on that. And I know there are some people who like specialize in that, so I can look up more about GU syndrome. Yeah, I got really distracted about chuanjiao and twice cooked pork. I feel like I'm losing my voice. And this is what happens when I lecture for 2 hours because I tend to be very shouty, so it's very easy for me to start losing my voice. I should have taken some pang dahai to soothe my voice. I'm just drinking green tea. I probably could have done something to help soothe my voice, like a pang dahai, and use some Chinese herbs. So if there are no other questions, I think we'll leave it there. I want to say special thank you to the people in the Patreon. Videos like this are possible because of the support of the Patreon members. If you're interested in joining that, I think there's a link in the description below. If you want to support the channel, there's really nothing extra. A lot of times when people set up a Patreon, there's like exclusive content or extra videos. There's really nothing like that. It's really just a way to support the channel. I think I give you some discounts on the courses. I only have one course right now, so it has some discounts on the course. But that's just if you want to support the channel. If you like this content and want to support the channel, there's a Patreon. So thank you to the Patreon people, and thank you to you for coming in on a Saturday morning and watching this. Especially if you're in some place like the Philippines or Russia, it's probably 3 or 4 in the morning. So thank you to you for coming and watching and sticking with us this long. And I think that's it. We'll sign out, and we'll see you next week back with a regular Q&A.